I love training cultural knife skills as well as knife combatives. I love Filipino martial arts, and the Medusa edged weapon system has changed how I express that. If you are a knife practitioner, I am sure you understand use of force models. If you are a knife practitioner, I'm sure that you go beyond the silly ideal of it's better to be tried by 12 than carried by 6. I'm sure you've put sobering thought into the combative use of the knife and how that fits in with self-defense law within your own country, your own culture, and your own community. If you haven't given this stuff thought, here is a starting point to think about this. Here in Canada and many places in the West, our laws are guided by English common law. It's based on English common law. And we are told that our self-defense must both be reasonable and necessary. This is important. If you get violent with someone and it wasn't necessary, if you were escalating the situation instead of trying to de-escalate the situation, if you had the opportunity to avoid and didn't take it, all of these things will be considered. Most people look at the use of a knife in a violent situation as an admission of guilt. You have to be an awful person to use a knife on another human being. This is important to consider. This is important to understand that you will likely be judged by people who already consider you guilty and may be prejudiced towards a person who would do something that horrific to another human being. That is why the knife must be an absolute last resort. This is for the worst case scenario. In Canada, a firearm is not an option. So if you are ever forced into a lethal force situation, you have to find other means, other equalizers. And this is why training for edged weapons, blunt impact weapons, and this kind of stuff is very important if you believe that there is any possibility you may have to deal with something like that. But keep in mind, the vast majority of Canadians never get into situations where the use of lethal force is appropriate. This is important to understand, and a good reason to have sober control over what you do under duress. I know through conversation with my fellow Medusa edged weapons instructors that these ideals, the use of force models, the scaling of use of force are all things we consider in our application of the Medusa system. I have yet to find a Medusa instructor who doesn't understand this. I like to believe that most knife and gun guys understand this, but I do see gung-ho posts every once in a while that tell me some are not taking the proper, sober attitude towards using an edged weapon. No matter how you use that weapon, it will be viewed as lethal force. Even if you cut and disable limbs, as some Filipino martial arts instructors advocate. Most of us advocate for that if we do Filipino martial arts. Defanging the snakes is a primary tactic in our art. The effectiveness of that tactic is debatable and probably is a worthy video later on. It would be foolish to think that if you did apply that tactic and it was successful, that anyone outside of the knife community would believe that you were scaling your use of force. It will be hard to argue that the cuts on the opponent's limbs weren't defensive wounds and that they weren't done while you were using lethal force against that person. However, morally, this might be something that is easier to take than just shoving a blade through somebody multiple times. If you have watched CCTV security video of people being assaulted with knives, being murdered with knives, you will note that often even a dead man continues to fight. Quite often people are stabbed 20, 30 times before they go down. And that's what you will be arguing is reasonable force. For me, a knife is a cutting tool that can be used as an improvised weapon in the worst case scenario. If you train for that scenario, it is an excellent tool, but it is not the best tool.